SAMTalks speaker is Fritz Brauner. Now, Fritz's first day as a registered rep was April Fool's Day, 1980. The Dow Jones closed that day at 787, and since that, it has increased over 20 times, a fact Fritz often tries to take credit for. Fritz was one of the few people on the planet to actually be in the audience on February 9th, 1964, when the Beatles made their first live U.S. TV appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show. Now, Fritz is an East Coast guy growing up in Scarsdale, New York. He's also an Ivy League guy, earning a bachelor's from Cornell and an MBA from Columbia Business School. Fritz spent his first 15 years after graduation working for IBM, wearing lots of white shirts. 7 of those years, he was a systems engineer, which he later discovered was great training for being a financial advisor. Fritz met his future wife and business partner at IBM, while Sue was on a temporary assignment from the Milwaukee branch office. Almost 40 years later, Fritz and Sue are the rare couple who can both work together, they're both advisors, and live together and stay married through all of that. Fritz says that one of the best things about being in business for yourself as a financial advisor is that you can be yourself. One of his favorite quotes by Oscar Wilde is, "Be yourself, everyone else is taken." So now, being himself is Fritz Brauner.
Pretty amazing, huh? Wow, I must be a cool person. Apple pie, pumpkin pie, and cherry pie. So now that you're all back from the break and breakfast is over, what a perfect time to talk about pie, right? Say yes. Yes. So that's what we're going to do. But we're not going to talk about the kind of pie that you might be thinking of. So let me tell you a story that about 25 years ago, no, 15, it seems like 25. 15 years ago, I read an article that really changed my life. And the article was in, of all places, ARP magazine. The article had a number of stories of people who had turned 50 and their reflections and thoughts about reaching that milestone age. There are a number of interesting stories, but the one that struck me the most was what Steven Spielberg said. Now that I've turned 50, he said, I realize that I no longer have to prove myself to other people. I no longer have anything to prove to myself. I just have to keep myself interested. Wow, I thought. I just have to keep myself interested. So I think that thought really, really resonated with me because at the time, I was trying to figure out how I was going to define success for the second half of my life. And a conversation I know that many of you have already had with yourselves, and some are probably having now. So after I thought about that, I said, cool. What I need to do, that's it, is keep myself interested for the rest of my life. But just one little problem. What exactly am I supposed to keep myself interested in? I had no clue. Well, luckily, my subconscious mind was hard at work, and over the next several weeks, it began to answer some of those questions. So for one thing, I realized that I find people to be very interesting creatures. You know, our clients, our friends, our family, some of them are pretty interesting characters. Secondly, I realized that I like being exposed to ideas, especially new ideas. And I must confess that I'm a bit of a podcast junkie because I love podcasts. There's such a great wealth of information and speakers out there that we wouldn't hear necessarily other places. And thirdly, as some of you may know, my wife, business partner, and fellow advisor, Sue, and we really enjoy traveling. And one of the reasons we enjoy traveling is for the unique experiences that you have, many of which are experiences when you travel that you hadn't planned on having. So experiences are important to me. So now the pieces of the pie, if you will, were beginning to come together. If I could spend my time with interesting people, talking about interesting ideas, and having interesting experiences, then that's how, in Steven Spielberg's words, I would keep myself interested. People, ideas, and experiences, or pie. Voila. And you know, one of the cool things about being a financial advisor is I have unlimited opportunities to keep myself interested. So let's talk about the first letter, P, for people. I'll tell you a story about John, a long-term client. who's really a character. He lives in Half Moon Bay on the coast in Northern California. And back in his hippie days, John painted this giant peace symbol on the roof of his house. And today, it's still there. It's not going away. Secondly, Christmas time. John goes really crazy over Christmas time. Because at Christmas time, John has appointed himself the official judge of his neighborhood's best outdoor lighting decoration contest that he created. And he also created a trophy for that he awards to the winner. And the trophy looks a lot like the Stanley Cup trophy. And like the Stanley Cup trophy, it's awarded to the winning house, and they get to keep it for a year until it goes to the next winner. And then Halloween. Wow. Halloween is a big deal for John because, get ready, John is a competitive pumpkin grower. That's right. I don't make this up. He's a competitive pumpkin grower, of all things. So in the fall, for competitive pumpkin growers, competing in the annual Half Moon Bay Pumpkin Festival weigh-in contest is as big a deal as competing in the Boston Marathon is for marathoners. It's just the creme de la creme. So last fall, John was in my office for his annual review meeting. And at the end of the meeting, I just happened to ask him casually, so John, where are you going next? He said, I'm going to sword fighting school. What? Sword fighting school? What's that about? Well, he said, I'm going to be in a play, and I play the role of the villain who has a sword fight with the hero. Well, what do you know about sword fighting, John? Absolutely nothing, he said. Wow. So I was just amazed by all that. I was just fascinated that somebody would actually spend their afternoon in sword fighting school. I mean, who even knew there were such things? Sword fighting school again, wow. So my curiosity got the best of me, and I bought a ticket to a Saturday evening performance of the play, Bullshot Crummin', if you're interested, in a small community theater on the coast. And it was great. I'm really glad I went, and I'm happy to report that John was excellent in his role of Otto von Bruno, having the duel with the hero. And the good news is that it looked like a real sword fight, and then secondly, no one got hurt. So I can see almost on your faces you're asking, why am I telling you this anyway? Well, there actually is a good reason behind it. And that's because I believe that everyone has a story. And that's what makes people so interesting to me. Everyone has a story. It doesn't matter where you were born, where you went to school, how much or how little money you have. Everyone has a story. A retired Bank of America executive who's a Buddhist monk and writes haiku poetry. A woman who flies to Cambodia every year to teach origami, you know that thing, origami to small children. And a couple that raises prize-winning Airedales. Everyone has a story. And the cool thing is, as their financial advisor, I get to hear those stories. How cool is that? So the second letter of the word pi is what? Thank you. Actually, it's I. The second letter is I. The word is ideas. Sue would tell you I'm a bit of a perfectionist, but never mind. So the second letter is I for idea. You're all right. Everyone's a winner. Is I for ideas. Now, Dan Sullivan has a saying. Dan Sullivan, founder of Strategic Coach, has a saying, every day I go to school. I just don't know when I wake up in the morning what I'm going to learn that day. What a cool mindset. Every day is a learning day. Now, there are two types or methods of learning. There's random and there's intentional. Random learning occurs, well, at random, when you weren't expecting to learn something. An example I had of that recently was meeting with a client, and I discovered that both of her parents spent almost all of World War II locked in a Japanese internment camp in Northern California. Whew. Wow, that was unexpected learning. Another completely different example of unexpected learning occurs when, let's say you're online searching for something, and you click on a link on the page, which takes you to another page, and it has its own links, which you click on, and it takes you more pages and more links and more clicks, and pretty soon you forget what in the world you were looking for in the first place. Has that ever happened to any of you? Come on, we're friends. Yes, it has. So what's cool about that, though, is, my view, is that at the end of all that search, I did learn some things that I hadn't planned on learning when I started the day. How cool was that? So then there's intentional learning. So intentional learning is when, as it sounds, you're purposely pursuing some information, such as you're attending a workshop, you're reading a book, you're listening to a podcast. Now, podcasts are one of my favorite ways of learning information because there's so much out there that's so easily available. And it turns out whenever I get in the car, I can't wait to listen to the newest episode of I Love Marketing, or Less Doing, More Living, or Steve Sandusky's Between Now and Success. Whether it's a short trip or a long trip, it doesn't matter, because I know that whatever's on the podcast is way more interesting than what's on the radio. And as an added benefit, I've discovered that I don't get stressed out in traffic like I used to, because if the traffic is slow, well, great, I have more time to listen to the podcast. And that really is an amazing change in your mindset. A final comment on intentional learning. It occurred to me that I think a lot of people spend a lot more time thinking about the kind of food that they put into their body than they do the kind of information that they put into their brain. Think about that. That thought occurred to me several years ago when I was sitting on the couch watching the evening news, something I almost never do. And suddenly I'm sitting there saying, why am I watching all this negative news about things that have nothing to do with me, don't impact my life at all? So I know I need to be informed, but do I really need to know about fires and robberies and car crashes? No, so stop watching it. And then my favorite is CNN, the continuous negative news network. Right? They're still looking for that Malaysia plane somewhere. No, I don't need to know that. Maybe a little, zoom in for a bit, but enough already. I don't need to know that. So since that time, I've become, on purpose, very selective and intentional about the kind of information I put into my brain. And here's the thing, if I can be as selective and intentional about the kind of food I put in my body, well, I'm going to be a perfect human being. Cool, and who wouldn't want to be perfect? Sue? So experiences, the last, I won't ask you, the last letter is E for experiences. And travel is one of our favorite ways to have experiences. So on one trip, we saw some of the most spectacular, amazing scenery you'll see anywhere in the world when we rode the Glacier Express in Switzerland that goes through 91 tunnels and over 291 bridges over the span of 7 hours. Just amazing. Another example is after the last Masters Forum here in 2011, Sue and I drove north to Savannah to spend a few days there. Turns out one of those days, we didn't know this, was St. Patrick's Day. Yeah, you've been there. Amazing, who knew? St. Patrick's Day is a big, big deal for Savannah. They have the second largest St. Patrick's Day parade in the country, and they pour green dye into all of the hundreds of fountains throughout the city. I mean, look at that. It's very cool. So who knew? We didn't know. But again, that's what's cool about travel. It's the unexpected experiences that you have. Another example of this is, let's say, we do this all the time, getting lost while you're driving through the country roads in Europe. We seem to be very good at getting lost. But I read in an airline magazine recently, but don't worry if you're lost, it's easy to figure out where you're going. So I read in an airline magazine recently some interesting perspective. It said, next time you're lost, don't think of it as being lost. Think of it as taking a self-guided, unplanned tour of a part of the country that wasn't on your itinerary. Makes perfect sense. Now, some travel experiences, of course, involve interactions with people, often in unexpected ways. A number of years ago, Sue and I were having a Sunday brunch at a small-town hotel. And after looking at the menu, I looked at our server, who was a young girl who seemed to be pretty new at the job of serving, and I asked her a reasonable question. Can you make the Western omelet with egg whites? She looked a bit puzzled, thought about it, and said, sir, all of our eggs come with egg whites. What? I'm usually good at a comeback. I just, what do you say, Oliver? I mean, whoa. So you can let me know some other time what you would say to that. I had no clue what to say. Oh, yes, I know you're wondering. We did get our egg white omelets, so apparently somebody in the kitchen had heard the phrase or term before. Now, you know, I think that one of the reasons why we all have such interesting experiences when we travel is that we're out of our normal environment and we're not operating in our usual autopilot mode. But you don't have to travel to have interesting experiences. Taking a good client to dinner and just having a nice conversation. Hearing an interesting speaker at Rotary. Listening to a SAMTalk. Thank you for laughing. Interesting to a SAMTalk. Now that's interesting for you and the speaker. So interesting experiences are everywhere. All right, so now you know my story. My personal definition of success is to have lots and lots of pie. Interesting people, interesting ideas, and interesting experiences. That's my story. Now, as I said, everyone has a story. And I can tell by looking out there that you all have lots of interesting stories just waiting to be told. So let me issue you this challenge. Sometime during the next break, or at dinner, or on the golf course, take a moment and turn to the person next to you and ask them, what's your story? You will be absolutely amazed at what you learn. Thank you.